多謝晒啊！首先歡迎各個團。
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I thank the administration and deputations as well as individuals to attend. The first session was chaired by the Deputy Chairman, Mr. Eunice Ho, and now he has to go somewhere else, so I will be here to chair this session. Let me remind you that if necessary, you can use the earpiece in front of you. Channel 0 is the floor, 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, and channel 3 is Putonghua. You will each have 2.5 minutes. I'll be quite strict with time allocation because the public hearing will last until 7:40. There will be 3 sessions. Let me remind you that what you say and what you write in your submission will not be covered by the Legislative Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And please also pay attention to the notice to persons attending legislative meetings or sitting in public gallery. You find the notice attached to you. You'll find the notice attached to the letter sent to you is also in front of you, and if necessary, you may also get a copy from the security guard. If you have written submission and you haven't given the same to us, please write your name on it and give it to our staff member for our reference. I will now ask Mr. Wang Zhogi to speak. Good afternoon. I come here to speak for the underprivileged. Yes, environmental protection should be done all over the world. However, our government drags its feet. I don't know why they do that. If you charge, it doesn't mean that waste will disappear. Why do you want to charge? The secretary said that because there is too much waste, and he's bought tons of rubbish bags to put bin bags in to put them into landfill. So the secretary itself is just another big waster. The secretary also said it's only about $35 a month only. And I get very angry. Do you know that many people spend less than $30 a day? Well, don't just say what Ms. Law Chi Kwong said, that we will help the underprivileged, but we will scrutinize your finances. There are some elderly people who don't know how much their spouse has hidden away, and they don't want to be prosecuted because they have exceeded the means test. Environmental protection is very important, but does the Environment Bureau know where waste come from? Do you know about recycling? Most important thing to do is recycling. This recyclables you've collected, where does it go? If you want to charge, ask a university to conduct a study to find out where the recyclables collected can be reused and given another life. If you don't find a way for them, then they will be disposed of in a landfill. I don't want to vent here or moan here. I just want you to understand. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Next, Mr. Chen from the Lion Rock Institute. We strongly oppose to the municipal solid waste charging. We do think that just like the colonial government, environmental hygiene should be the priority when it comes to waste disposal. People litter because it's very convenient. So Hong Kong has the most number of bins in the street. That's why Hong Kong is very clean compared to other places. But if there is waste charging, then people will just throw rubbish everywhere. And the Clean Hong Kong campaign will fall through. Rubbish is not just generated by Hong Kong residents. According to the Tourism Commission, there was 40 million people coming to Hong Kong between January and March. And over 10 million of them are from the mainland. So you can imagine the amount of waste generated. So if the government try to catch people littering, then people will feel very strongly they'll be up in arms against a certain government departments. And then the press will start to report about waste generated by visitors. And then they will turn into anti-tourist activities. When it comes to waste disposal, there should be priority given to public health. So anything that threatens this should be discarded. Next, Ms. Jiu Bokum. I live in Yuen Long. I had a chance to participate in a recycling program. I've been in it for 4 months. The way waste is disposed of under the program makes me think that we do have the ability to deal with waste. Starting from a few months ago, I properly disposed of clothes, food waste, metal. I have actually made some calculation. I managed to reduce the waste by 90%. So it's only a small bag of waste that I generate every year. I do think it's very effective. I have a 7-person household, and they eat at home 3 times a day. And in the residential development I live in, well, I'm afraid to say that it is a failure. It's a property of Sun Hung Kai. The food waste machine was cancelled about a month ago. What was the reason? Management? Misunderstanding? Or high fees? Different people have different versions. I think that the initiative is good, but it fell through after 2 years. Is it the case that some organizations will have special privilege? Is it the case that healthcare organizations will have special privilege to deal with healthcare waste? I see that I work in one of these healthcare organizations, and I see that a lot of the waste are treated as just normal waste and is transported to landfill. But most of them are metal and can be separated and recycled. I have some views. I would like to see reforming of refuse collection points. With waste charging, people will dispose of less waste. So the functioning and positioning of these stations should be reviewed. So can the steering group on the modification of recycling and refuse collection facilities in public places look into this? Sorry, there are many of deputations here, and I have to stop you. Next, Mr. Chen Jikao. The Hong Kong Institute of Housing supports municipal waste charging. If it can target operational difficulties, then there will be effective waste reduction at source. So in relation to paragraph 25 enforcement, we have the following suggestions. There can be a new enforcement department taking reference from the Tobacco Control Office of the Department of Health, but there should be sufficient manpower and resources to conduct regular and blitz operation targeting black spots. This new department can be independent and enforce targeted action, and there can be a fixed penalty. In relation to operation details, paragraph 20. Well, we suggest that some Hong Kong buildings use their own contractors, and there are also some old buildings with no management companies or no owners corporations. Residents will have to take their own rubbish to the refuge collection point. If they use designated rubbish bags, then perhaps the gate fees can be waived. The operation of these bin sites should be looked into. Funds and technical support should be given to these buildings, and there can be a dedicated allocation from the government. Paragraph 14. Oversized waste. We propose that the label will only apply to residential estates that are covered by the FEHD and is done by weight. The government should widely publicize this initiative. Paragraph 29. Support of waste reduction and recycling. We suggest that when it comes to waste separation at source, more should be done. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chan. Next is Mr. Jiu. Thank you. I welcome this charging scheme. I do think that recycling is important in waste reduction. It's also very important to increase recycling rate. We need the government and the recycling industry to work together so that valuable waste can be turned into resources. However, the recycling industry faces a lot of challenges. Say, for example, high operation cost, high rental, high transportation fees, and low profit. Say, plastic in 2015, each ton is worth 6,000. 2016 is dropped to 3,100. Profit has dropped by half, so there is little to be made if you take away the cost. So two sizable plastic recycling companies have closed. With the dwindling recycling industry, recycling rate will drop. According to a statistic of the EPD, the plastic recycling has dropped from 1.5 million ton to only 200,000 ton, and then a few years later 90,000. So a drop by 60% in recycling rate. So I have doubts. Even if we properly do waste separation, without support and without proper market for these recyclables, then all we see is that they will just go to landfills. So I ask the government to properly support the recycling industry, make good use of the $1 billion recycling fund, streamline the procedures, shorten the application period so that money can effectively go to operators so that they will find it easier to operate.
Also, I hope that the government could consider low rental land for recyclers so that they can reduce the operating costs. And also there might be a subsidy scheme to increase their profits. Next, Ms. Yan for the Environmental Engineering Chamber of Commerce. We are against the charging of gate fees for private refuse collectors. Now, very often they own a vehicle and operate as individuals. They only earn $20 or $30. So how can they pay the fees up front? For 3 months, it would be over $700,000. One vehicle, 3 months, they have to pay up front. 700,000. 3 vehicles. You can multiply and get the figures. Very often, the clients don't pay up until 6 months later. So what are we to do? So we think that it should not be for the operators to pay the fees up front. Now, the drivers have to pay the fees up front, so it will turn into bad debt. This arrangement would not reduce waste and is against the polluter pays principle. And the self-employed vehicle owners would go out of business. They have to pay for the installments for their vehicles, and they have to pay for these fees up front. They can only carry refuse. They cannot carry goods or people. The FEHD can charge for the plastic bags, whereas the private operators of refuse collection vehicles have to pay the fees up front. So the government hasn't considered the interests of the other stakeholders. There's a lot of work that is placed on the shoulders of the frontline staff. This is unrealistic. This is perfunctory. The best way is that the waste producer can choose to register or to pay by bag. Please provide us with a written submission. Next, Mr. Chen Kai-wai. I'm a counselor. Now, the methods are not practical. One should charge by household. You shouldn't charge by the building. Never mind about transitional periods. We became the participants in a pilot scheme, and after a few years, there has been little change. The management companies and the housing estates are mostly against this. The government says it cannot enforce the law by itself. It leaves the work to the property management companies and the owners' corporations, but they don't have the power to enforce the law. They can't issue summonses to people leaving the garbage in the back staircase. It's like private roads. Now, owners' corporations are authorized to lock up cars, but the other stakeholders are not so authorized in respect of the refuse. Now, you expanded the landfill and you alarmed people, but there wasn't any consequence when the people blockaded the landfills. So the government should set the example. there was public knowledge that some CEDD officers dumped some waste. The waste was dumped on private ground, so the private landowners have to pay. And there should be refunding to the housing estates from the MPF for waste reduction. Transportation Vehicles Association. The government should take up responsibility for recycling waste. This responsibility shouldn't just be shunted onto contractors or to the vehicle owners. Now, even if the government pays up front, we don't accept that. If some client doesn't pay, is it that the government will bear the burden? Now you are going to charge 360. It's right now it's free. Now it's 12 times what people are paying now, so we are against this charging. And there are many refuse collection stations where the large catering establishments dump their waste, and there is little regulation about industrial safety. Now, the government should provide subsidies like for recycling of waste. There should be more incinerators that will generate electricity. That will be better for Hong Kong's environment. We wouldn't have so much waste. The government should fulfill its own responsibility rather than leave it to the contractors and to the owners of single vehicles. The transportation operators, they are the stakeholders. They are not the waste producers. If the government levies a fee, it should be levied at source, not against the vehicles, because the vehicles cannot survive. Now you increase the cost by 12 times. Previously, there is no fee charged at the landfills. Thank you, Mr. Siu. Next, Ms. Lam. The government should develop a good recycling system. Apart from charging, there should be support measures so that the grassroots are not adversely affected. Now, the producer responsibility schemes should be implemented. There are civic groups that are operating recycling facilities, and this is working well in the community recycling network. They have limited resources, so the government should provide greater support. For instance, in the building where I live, now there is a refuse collection point right across. Now, very often the waste is mixed up with some unhygienic substance, so ultimately the materials end up in the landfills. Perhaps there can be separating the waste at these refuse collection points so that there can be better handling. Now, for city dwellers, you can get recycling done for the plastic bottles. Now, you haven't done anything about domestic kitchen waste, so we hope that can be tackled first. It shouldn't be just used for power generation. Some of the substances are very valuable organic materials. They can be used for composting, for local agriculture, and it can be used to grow green plants in the neighborhoods. Next, Mr. Leung Man Kit, Hong Kong Green Environmentally Friendly Engineering Council. We support the Municipal Solid Waste Charging Scheme. At the same time, we support a multi-pronged approach. On the side of education, they should be increasing people's awareness, separating waste, reducing waste at source. There should be a designated fund to assist the recycling industry and related services, and to develop recycling technology, and the government should develop more recycling systems, provide more recycling facilities, increasing the overall recycling capacity, find uses for the recycled materials. We know that organic resources are important. Kitchen waste is also a large proportion of domestic waste. We hope that the organic waste recycling center should be implemented early, and the subsequent phases should be expedited. On the side of policies, the government should consider giving priority to locally produced recycled materials, and there should be a certification arrangement, and the relevant industry should be assisted in its development. There should be producer responsibility scheme for packaging, so as unnecessary packaging can be reduced. Now, there are many tall buildings in Hong Kong. Law enforcement is difficult. Now, environmentally friendly construction and building design is also very important. Mr. Leung Chi Wai, Modern Catering Management Company. So our association has the following views about the scheme. The catering industry is strongly against the government charging the industry in the name of producer responsibility. This is a very ineffective scheme. It doesn't really reduce waste. The industry is very unclear about how the government would enforce the law. A shop at an establishment on the upper floor can throw the waste onto a lower floor. There would be a lot of dispute. There would be a lot of burden on small and very small enterprises. The government should formulate long-term environmental policies to achieve the greatest effect with the least amount of money. There should be recycling by source so that the kitchen waste and solid waste can be separated at source at a low cost. If the government insists in charging for waste, it should avoid double charging by removing the current element in the waste disposal charges. Now, when the discarded waste is below a certain level, can the payment be lower? Would you offer some incentive or encouragement? Thank you, Mr. Leung. Next, Mr. Lee Chan Wai. From the United Labour Chi Hong Association. Now, we think that the scheme will only have an effect initially. The government should implement 4 measures. First, separation of waste at source. There should be more recycling bins, more categories of recycled materials for more thorough recycling. The government should be determined to step up education and publicity. There should be more APIs, and it should work with the efforts and various community groups. Now, for recycling of plastics, now many operators don't accept them. 2 recyclers have closed up. There are less and less channels for recycling. If you depend on exports, you must ensure that there will be someone to take the waste. Otherwise, they will end up in the landfills. Now, the recycling fund has not been really that effective. You should provide greater support to the recycling industry. You should lease the land at preferential rates to the industry, or you should provide subsidies. Only then would you show your determination and the public would work with you. Otherwise, people just generate more waste because they can pay. They can afford to pay for it. Ultimately, it might become just a nuisance to the public.
Next one is Dr. William Yu from World Green Association. Well, if we don't reduce the waste, then landfills will be overloaded. And if we are forced to build incinerators, there will be opposition, and we don't know how to deal with the large amount of waste. Our recycling rate is lower than Taiwan and South Korea, so we need to resort to economic means to reduce waste. Several years after the levy was imposed in Taipei and Seoul, the garbage quantity was reduced by 40%. Well, the result was achieved because the government and people joined together in finding solutions. And Hong Kong government actually had not really adopted the principle of cost effectiveness and environmental protection in handling the waste issue. And of course, I know the current issue is very complicated, and in various cities they used to be filled or surrounded by waste in the streets. But Hong Kong people should have a high quality than other people in elsewhere. There's a proposal that Hong Kong people and district councils and government representatives should join hands together in tackling waste issue in every district and lay down strategies to reduce waste. And even in some black spots or individual or single buildings, try to tackle the issues one after another. The government should also lobby private waste collectors and sort out the financial problems, if any, that they have. We need to list out all the potential problems and try to find solutions for all of them. We have still a few years to go. Now it's time to allocate resources to tackle the looming problems. The government may have to pay for solutions and also to tackle some outstanding issues. You need to try to identify contractors, and then hopefully in a few years' time we can have the charging scheme in full swing. That would be a more pragmatic approach. Therefore, World Green Association calls on the government not to forget your original intention. You should legislate as soon as possible to impose the waste charging scheme so that everyone will face up to the reality of finding a place to store the or accommodate the garbage, and instead of just bowing down to individual complainants. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Chung. Yeah, Mr. Chung. I do hope that before implementing the policy, the government should have overall widespread publicity to let the public know how they should separate the waste and what would incur a charge. For new buildings, they have garbage room where there are recycling bins and so forth. But in the many old-style buildings, the waste are just stopped out on staircase. There's no room for other facilities to help people separate their waste. So let me give you an example. For some wet rubbish, often we had disputes with residents because they threw away all the wet garbage, which really stink. And yet nobody was willing to take responsibility. And there are also some construction materials placed everywhere on the streets overnight, or even in staircase or back alleys. So often we are forced to have to remove them from the streets. And there are some garbage even put outside stores, blocking the entrance to shops. When we call FEHD or Highways Department to collect the waste, nobody came. So the issue is that the government has not launched enough publicity to alert the public of the potential penalties and the relevant legislations. I think the government should provide clear guidelines to property management companies, cleaning companies, security companies, to let them know what they should do, how they should deal with the scattered garbage. We don't want to see our workers, because of garbage, engage in verbal disputes, or even at the risk of being fired because of disputes with residents. Thank you. There should be clear guidelines. Thank you, Mr. Chung. Next one, Mr. Yang, from the SAR Cleaning Merchants Association. The government has taken the lead in creating a conflict. It asks people to use labels and buy dedicated bags, but yet garbage collected by non-FEHD trucks need not buy the labels. I think most people wouldn't know that, and they may have to buy. So end up people have to buy handbags and need to pay more to get the collectors to come. If you want to use designated, why don't you just use unified garbage bags and labels? And now the public would become more clearer, and that would do away with the huge financial burden faced by the private collectors. So I think that you should really come up with a feasible solution. And in the future, what about people throwing away the garbage in dedicated garbage bags? We would definitely, the cleaners would be willing to collaborate if this is made clear, what we're supposed to do. But in some housing estates, for residents who do not use garbage bags or labels, our cleaners will still carry out their work to throw away the rubbish. But if FEHD said they would not accept them because they're not in designated bags, then how should we deal with those wastes? So the EPD needs to come up with a solution and tell us what we should do. You cannot really shoulder or put the ball to us. Thank you. Next one is Ms. Chow, the Government Frontline Staff Association. I hope to say that the EPD will actually think twice about implementing the scheme. You need to have the support measures first before launching the scheme. It's like for us who live in housing estate, public housing estate, our rent already includes the charge or the cost for disposing garbage. Now with your new scheme, people in the grassroots will only face additional financial burden. To top officials, to you it's a tiny amount. It's not an issue at all to you. But for people in the grassroots, the extra charge will incur additional burden. Even $10, $20 means that they can buy extra meals for them. Our frontline officers or FHD workers, they can only issue warning, but they don't have power to lodge any prosecution. So that means under your scheme, workers in the front line will face even heavier workload. And for people who do not follow the rule in disposing of the garbage will end up, having disputes with them. I just returned from Taiwan. I saw in Taiwan that what you called very good environmental measure, protection measure in handling garbage, they didn't really do the good job. There were no rubbish bins on the streets, but they just used white bags to carry the waste, and the white bags are scattered everywhere along the streets. The garbage are not separated or sorted, and in the end, the cleaners just put all the garbage into another bag, and the 660 liter containers are locked, but on the lid, there are some holes, 3 or 4 holes on the lid, which do not actually separate the waste. Everyone can put whatever garbage they have into the container. So the garbage which is supposed to be separated end up going into the dumper truck and end up being dumped on landfills. So if Hong Kong were to implement the scheme, I hope that the EPD can have a proper support measures so that those in the front line will not face incredible burden. And please try to avoid any or help us not engage in unnecessary conflicts with members of the public. You need to have concrete measures instead of just shouting empty slogans. Thank you. Ms. Tam next. Good afternoon. I don't know whether you can see the banner. I'm from the Tumun team of Pt2's team. We have different discussions on the new scheme. I think there are 3 key points. One is the responsibility of consumers, producers, and recycling. The charge or the waste charging scheme can, of course, encourage reduction of waste, but you cannot rely on consumers alone. Like in the case of Vitasoy, it has to, for its products, for the entire manufacturing process, needs to pay for the cost of production. But at the same time, the consumers also need to put the carton into the garbage bin. And if a consumer buys paper Vitasoy, then they need to pay the levy surcharge. But if they buy the bottled Vitasoy, then they would not need to pay for the cost. So therefore, for consumers and recyclers, they are indispensable for reducing waste. If Vitasoy monopolizes the market, only produce paper products, that means consumers have no choice. That is, once they have bought the paper Vitasoy, then they have to deal with the paper disposal. And yet, the Vitasoy, the manufacturer, will only transfer the additional cost for complying with environmental rules to consumers. So consumers cannot have the packaging recycled, and yet they have to pay surcharge imposed by the manufacturer. So you really need to get the manufacturers to provide recycling of their own products. The government is trying to implement the waste surcharge. But don't forget, the generator of waste is not just consumer alone. The manufacturers themselves are also waste generators. So you need to impose regulations on the three elements: recyclers, consumers, and manufacturers. And also, in 2007, there used to be a scheme in housing estates to charge levy for waste. You need to release the report on that scheme and see what effect it did achieve. Thank you. Next one is Ms. Low, Yvonne Low, from a environmental protection group, Carbon Care InnoNap. We are carrying out pilot schemes now, and in our schemes we encounter several difficulties. I think the administration must come up with more support measures. That is, in charging for waste, you need to also provide for recycling support, whether for kitchen waste or plastic bottles or glass bottles. You need to make sure that the products can be in the hands of recyclers in the end. Manufacturers have their own problems, but if end up we don't have unified support, then for people in the households who separate the waste, but in the end, if what we have separated end up going to the same landfill in the end, being dumped on landfill, then what's the point of doing it at household? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Low. Next one is Ms. Lau, Household Concern Group. I'd like to point out that before implementing the charging scheme, the administration should consider the situations of various groups, particularly for elderly people and the disabled. Say in some residential homes, in some private homes, they, on this charging scheme, want to see how they can reduce the costs involved. Say diapers or cleaning services for the residents, the costs are quite high, and some homes, in order to reduce manpower, they have cut down on reducing diapers, and that would not be good for the hygiene of elderly residents. If you are going to impose the charge, have you considered the possibility that such homes would transfer the cost on to the residents? And also, the living environment of elderly people is very important. You can just say that, well, $30 a month may not seem a big amount to you, but for families on CSSA or those living on living allowance, then that is a huge burden. And sometimes when they get weak, they may need to alter the interior decorations in their homes. The housing department may need to carry out repair work in their units. How about the house? Then that will incur additional household costs. So if the waste is charged on the basis of weight, say $11 per piece, that would mean a huge financial burden to the elderly. We're not just talking about elderly people on CSSA, but also those who are on living allowance for elderly people, because they don't have income anymore. And also, would you consider catering to those organizations who are offering daycare services to elderly people? Can they be exempted? Otherwise, the cost will be transferred to the elderly people. And also for the disabled, they need always sometimes to clean their wounds. So would you give them special treatment or exemption? Because for the disabled to live with their family, the family may think that because of their need, their financial burden increases. So at this stage, the government should announce the adjustments in the charging scheme ASAP. What sort of support you could provide to people on CSSA or elderly people? So I hope that you can announce the details for charging ASAP. Thank you, Ms. Lau. And the next one is Ms. Ma. I'm a representative from an environmental group. I do support the implementation of the scheme because it can provide an economic incentive, encouraging the public to reduce waste. But we think that you need to provide more support measures for the implementation. Right now, there are two modes of charging. One is to have the designated garbage bags, and the other is charged on the basis of collection by private waste collectors. But I think everyone should be charged on the basis of dedicated garbage bags, because only then can you achieve the goal of throwing away less garbage to pay less. As for implementation, Well, there isn't any representatives from FEHD. I want to say that even though they would not collect garbage not in designated bags, but for us, we people, when disposing of our garbage, would not go all the way to garbage collection points to dispose of them. So who can they return the unclassified garbage to, and who can they prosecute? We think that you should set up a waste reduction unit with dedicated staff to actually inspect buildings or the black spots to see whether there are any offenders of the law. Public education, of course, is important for reducing waste, but you need to think about the source of waste often comes from manufacturers. So I think the Environment Bureau, of course, it has launched the PRS, but I think you should really extend the scheme to plastic manufacturers. Lots of plastics are generated now, and their recycling value is so low. You should also limit the amount of packaging and make it compulsory for manufacturers to label the type of plastic used in the packaging. That would help with the recycling, and we should have legislation regulating or making it compulsory for manufacturers to, like in the case of US, stay away from using certain types of plastics. And fourthly, for recycling, there are not enough recycling facilities. Even though you say that you would increase the number of recycling bins, you need to actually, for example, model after some initiatives in the community to encourage recycling, more recycling. Next one is Chen Chi-Kwai from 121C Society for Recycling. Thank you. I'm chairman of 121C Society for Recycling. It is a NGO mainly targeting recycling of plastics. Since 2 months ago, we began a simulated recycling scheme in Central and Western District. So there are 30 private buildings and 3 new buildings to carry out recycling, the recycling initiative. We collaborate with some cleaning companies to make sure that the garbage is weighed and use recycling bags. And we also provide receipts to every household every month to see each household how much they should pay. We have carried out our opinion survey, which found that 80% of the residents felt that garbage is a serious issue. They would support the waste charging scheme. And they also pointed out that if the monthly charge is $15 to $35 a month, then they would accept it.
So they want, I would like this to be the charging basis, because this is in line with the polluter pays principle. And I found that when it comes to buildings with no management or OCs, well, cleaners find that acceptable. Because with a charging scheme, there will be more recyclables. That means they will be able to make more money. And residents ask for more supporting facilities, say, for example, recycle bins and longer opening hours of rubbish bins. A few years ago, with the plastic bag levy, there was a drastic reduction of plastic bag. So we are quite more optimistic about this scheme. Next, Ms. Yolanda Ng. I come here as a district councillor of Wan Chai, especially Causeway Bay. We face a big problem when it comes to waste. I remember in 2012, I said to the Bureau that over 70% respondents of a survey we conducted expressed support. Because if there is proper management of one building, then the next building with poorer management will dump their rubbish onto them. So it's a problem. People who supported the proposal back then expressed their concern to me because they thought that there might not be effective enforcement measures in place. In order to allay their concern, I hope there will be enhancement of education and publicity and to enhance the incentive. Well, people are undisciplined. How do you enhance the incentive to encourage people to do it? That is the problem. We do need enhanced enforcement. Community planning is also important. If the refuse collection point is very far away, how do you encourage people to dispose of the waste properly? This is also a tourist area. There are a lot of standalone buildings. Is a lump sum able to deal with that? What about illegal waste disposal? Can there be a dedicated team to help with enforcement? In Wan Chai, we have the Luod Road refuse collection station dealing with the various types of rubbish, but the condition is appalling. Gloucester Road is very well designed, but the opening hours is quite short. For individual contractors, they might have collected rubbish from 10 buildings, and then they will have to wait for hours for the refuse collection vehicle to come to collect it. So during those few hours, the road rats had a good time. Thank you very much. Mr. Tam from the Hong Kong Waste Disposal Industry Association. Our association was set up in 1995. It's heavily related to waste management. Back in 1995, on the 16th of June, there was a strike by refuse collection vehicles because of a proposal they made to shift responsibility. Well, FVHD vehicles account for half of the refuse collection vehicles of the total 600 ones. But we're talking about 4,000 standalone buildings and commercial industrial units. They will generate an enormous amount. In the evening, when we collect waste from standalone buildings, well, you won't be able to tell which are the ones that we have collected. And sometimes the standalone buildings, residents will ask that they are owners and residents. They ask why there is a different approach compared to buildings with management company. And they thought that if they have bought the designated bags, then waste would be collected. But that is not the case. Just now, a district councillor said that well, at night, cleaners will have to collect waste, and between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. everything has to be cleared away. So do we ask the OC chairman at 4 a.m. to come and weigh the bags we have collected? I do support charging scheme, but it has to be feasible. Otherwise, it will be useless. I hope that all government officials will actually think about feasibility. Mr. Law and then Mr. Lee. Mr. Law Gin Wai from the Federation of Environmental and Hygiene Services. We support the government's producer responsibility scheme and polluter pays. But when it comes to private cleaning contractors, they will have to pay in advance gate fees. We're very concerned about this. For private collectors, usually they sign contract with management companies. They collect waste from individual operators, but there is no legal channel for them to charge them. For private waste collectors, they collect waste from waste stations in, say, a shopping mall. You can't tell which operator has churned out how much waste. So it doesn't go in line with a dump less, save more. And for private waste collectors, they have to pay for about $400 a ton for gate fees in advance. Standard vehicles will have about 24 tons, so each vehicle trip will cost about $4,000, and they will operate 2 to 3 rounds. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. For a 24-ton vehicle, they make a business of just 100,000. So the gate fees will cost much more. And as Ms. Yan said, well, so most of the time clients will only pay once after a few months. So we're talking about an amount up to $1 million, which is a huge financial burden. So without a feasible mechanism to target polluter pays, we oppose to that. Last is Mr. Lee from the Liberal Party. Well, we have seen an increase of waste disposal from 8,900 tons to 10,000 tons. The government should take the lead and take more initiative. But sometimes the government think, well, if you can pay to get the problem resolved, then this is not a problem. You have heard about previous schemes, say glass bottle, and also the waste electrical and electronic equipment. If you charge, does it mean the problem will go away? In the past, we subsidize it by rates, but now on top of that, you want to impose another charging scheme. Is it double taxation? Is it fair to domestic households and businesses if it's charged by bag? If there is a bag if there is one bag that is not designated, who is going to pay for the fine? And if you live in a standalone building, someone throws away someone throws a bag in a bin or in the street, who is responsible for cleaning it? Waste charging, is it really the solution? We think that there should be first effective supporting facilities, waste reduction, reuse and recycle. Say, for example, glass bottles, it can be used as construction materials, paving bricks. You see that from 1998 to the free color recycle bins, do you see a lot of different types of waste being left there? old ladies will get the waste paper, others will go to the land waste. So we oppose to the municipal solid waste charging scheme. Deputations and individuals have spoken. Let's hear from the administration. I thank those who have attended. At the second half of March, after we have promulgated the details of waste charging, we have 2 public briefing and also dozens of briefing sessions to collect views. I would like to give a brief reply. We have heard general support. Of course, when it comes to the implementation details, you have some suggestions, say for example enforcement and recycling. But as to the general principle, you support it. If we tell from the experience of overseas places, with a charging scheme, it will bring about a huge reduction in waste. It will also induce behavioral change to waste reduction and recycling. In the past few years, when it comes to hardware and software, we have put in place different measures to enhance awareness of recycling rate and reduce rate. When it comes to hardware, for different types of buildings, whether it's your workplace or whether it's where you live, well, over 80% of these premises are covered by recycling facilities. We will provide more recycling bins and street side recycling bins. There is a steering group set up to review recycling and refuse collection facilities. We have plans to increase the number of recycling bins from 2,700 to 4,000. And in the future, waste bins to recycling bins will recycling bins to waste bins will increase as well. The ratio will increase. When it comes to the community green station and and its scope, well, paper, plastic. There are also other items covered, say for example waste, electronic equipment and also used clothes. There was a suggestion saying that asking whether existing refuse collection points facilities will be increased, say for example number of recycling bins. As I've said that under the steering group, there will be a review about increasing recycling facilities. Food waste. There are some views as asking if we will improve the on-site food waste facility. We have a blueprint for food waste. The main tenor of it is to turn waste into energy. There will be facilities, organic waste treatment facility being commissioned this year. Every day it will handle 200 tons of food waste. The second one will see tender soon. It will have a capacity of 300 tons a day. Residential buildings. Whether we will have any measures to improve our facilities. Well, whether it is for facilities 1 or 2, they mostly deal with food waste from commercial enterprises. Of course, when it comes to domestic premises, we aim at waste reduction at source, and we do see a reduction in food waste, because there is an enhanced awareness of reduction of food waste. Enforcement is also another area of concern. A number of people talked about enforcing the law at refuse collection points and also refuse collection vehicles. They asked whether there will be enforcement in residential estates. Deputations suggest so. So for individual floors or in rear lanes, well, even if you dispose of waste, you have to use designated bags. If not, we will act on intelligence, complaints, or blitz operations to enhance the awareness of compliance. When it comes to entering premises or individual floors, whether government officials will have the power, whether property management companies will have the power. We're aware of the concerns of property management companies. If we are to enforce the law on individual buildings, then we will inform management companies. There are also suggestions about low-income earners or those with special needs, whether the charge will be exempted. As we've said previously, as per the suggestion of the Council for Sustainable Development, we all have the responsibility to reduce waste. So exemption is not preferable. But when it comes to low-income earners, say CSSA recipients will consider giving them financial support. So also talk about the importance of public education. Publicity, public education are key. So we will do some more in this regard. Before the law comes into effect, there will be a year or year and a half preparation period for us to put in place publicity and public education to give details about the scheme and how waste reduction at source can be done. We also have plans to send out outreach groups to different buildings to promote our scheme and recycle.
Also, I'd like to respond to some suggestions from private refuse collectors. Now, the suggested gate fee is said to be likely to cause problems such as bad debts and cash flow problems. Now, we understand that, and the trade says that this may not be a good practice on the producer pays principle. Maybe the back charging arrangement would be closer to the producer pays principle. Now, we've talked to the industry and we adopt an open attitude to see whether the gate fee can be enhanced. So we will continue to talk to the trade. Now, if, as the trade says, or if, as some green group suggested, we should expand the bag arrangement, how to put that into practice for the remainder of the services, we are glad to listen to people's views. Right now, 3 members are going to ask questions. Please raise your hands. For those who haven't raised your hands, so because this segment will be to 6:05, and then we'll start at 6:10 till 7:40. 4 minutes. Hui Chi-fung first. Now, the proposed charging level, have you estimated how much recurrent revenue will that generate each year? Have you made a forecast? Now, our suggested fee is 11 cents per liter and $365 and $395 for the gate fee. Now we are discussing the level of the fees, so it's rather difficult to forecast the amount to be collected because there are different views on how the gate fees, etc., are to be implemented. Now, I estimated that the government can generate about $1 billion of recurrent revenue from this charging scheme. Now, can you use the $1 billion for a large recycling scheme for research and technology, for support to the recycling industry? Now, these would be concrete commitments that can use the money to be collected in an effective way, because the public doesn't see how the government is going to commit itself to do more. So will you have new initiatives? Now, as we have explained in the past, on the charging arrangement, if there's going to be a recurrent revenue, should we provide then additional funds for environmental protection? As I said, it's difficult to assess how much recurrent revenue will be generated, but we do have a forecast on the resources to be invested. Now, every year, it would be about $2.7 billion, and for recycling, $1.3 billion. So that's on top of the collections cost. So we don't try to match it dollar for dollar. Well, the government has been engaging in public education, but the community kitchen waste recycling initiatives didn't really succeed, and the recycling fund hasn't been that effective. Now, if you tell the public that you merely offer the existing level of services, then the public will find it difficult to accept. You should learn from abroad how to upgrade the recycling industry and upgrade the technology. Next, Priscilla Leung, 4 minutes. We thank the deputations and the individuals here. You have provided valuable views. I have several questions for you and for the government. Now, many were concerned that the charges would be counterproductive. How will the government be able to reassure them? Now, there's a lady, Madam Chow, who mentioned the residents at the local level. Do you have helpers for the elderly people who live alone, how they deal with the refuse problem? The government has to offer support services. Also, medicine waste. Have you done any recycling work on medicine? Now, originally I wanted to deliver the medicine to the clinic, but they wouldn't accept it. And we took it to Queen Mary Hospital, but they wouldn't accept it either. So we don't have this at where I live, at the housing development where I live. Now, if the drugs are discarded into the sea, then there can be bad consequences down the biological chain. So what are you doing in this regard? Also, in domestic kitchens, there are kitchen waste disposal facilities which cost $20,000, and it can generate some fertilizer within a short period of time, which are dry. Now, can you offer subsidies for these machines that are larger in size for recycling of kitchen waste? I ordered this myself. The administration. Now, on kitchen waste, how to deal with that, I will ask the Assistant Director to reply on the current approach. On recycling work at the district level, now we try to help with the reduction of waste at source. And on recycling, now we hope to step up our outreach service to inform people and educate the public about reducing waste at source and increasing recycling. Now, Ms. Leung talked about medical waste, how it can be recovered. Now, at different hospitals, they are already doing this kind of work. Now, on how the materials can be used, well, perhaps the kitchen waste information can be supplied later. Chu Hoi Dik. I have 3 questions. First, in 2013, there was a blueprint for recycling 2013 to 22. Now, on producer responsibility, the thinking was that by 2016 to 18, you would study the application of the scheme to car tires, rechargeable batteries, etc. Now, the director was talking about plastic bottles. Now, what's the progress on the other areas mentioned? And the public often talk about kitchen waste. Now, it's a high percentage of domestic waste. If the government doesn't provide means to help them, and yet you charge them a fee, then many people would be aggrieved. Now, one speaker mentioned that in Korea they have a separate plastic bag for kitchen waste, and they have the technology to automatically open up the bags and handle the waste. Now, would you have a special bag for kitchen waste? And just now, Ms. Peng Yun Yi talked about a pilot scheme for 7 housing developments in 2004. Would you have a report on that? Now, on the 2014 pilot schemes, now we tried different ways, by household, by bag, etc. Several modes that we tried out, and we did a test, we did a trial, and we found that charging by bag would be the most effective. And another finding was that reduction of waste could be 10 to 15%. And however, the trial schemes never really charged a fee. Now in future, when the charging scheme is implemented, and we expect that the reduction would be even larger. Now on producer responsibility schemes, now we mention different materials, but every time we introduce a PPS, we had to study many factors, such as the impact of that product on the landfill, what is the volume, how to deal with the materials collected. Now, of course, we have to implement the PPS existing, and also we will try to implement the PPS for glass bottles. Our next target will be plastic bottles, and we will conduct more feasibility studies, and we will also look at other products. But right now the focus will be on plastic bottles. Now as for dealing with kitchen waste, I asked my colleague to respond. Firstly, in 2015 we introduced a scheme to subsidize housing developments for promoting recovery of kitchen waste. There are kitchen waste machines, and we have approved a number of schemes, and we recovered about 400 tons of kitchen waste a year as $30 million. So please provide a document in writing, and you can answer the other members' questions. Yu Chung-yin, a simple question. Now, many speakers said that there are many problems with law enforcement. Now, can you provide us with answers how you deal with law enforcement problems? Now, if someone doesn't use the bag, what will you say? If people just throw the refuse onto the street, what will you do? FAQ on law enforcement. Of course, we can certainly information on the future arrangement, law enforcement arrangements. When we implement the arrangements, there will be best practice guidelines for property management companies and so on. So you would provide a document, you would provide the good practice guidelines. The law enforcement problems. Next, Elizabeth Quack, can you be brief? Certainly. When we talked about waste charging, now, if you ask the public, do you support protect the environment, then everybody says yes. But when government produces a scheme, then people have questions. Now, one issue is law enforcement. What if the people just discard the refuse into the sea or into country parks? Now, if you don't show that you are determined, then people think the result might be worse than it is now. And we hope that the funds collected would be used to promote recovery of waste and reduction at source. So many members of the public think that is not reasonable. Now on reducing kitchen waste, turning waste into energy, etc., we don't see very forceful efforts by the government. I know you will be having plants for kitchen waste, and you have glass bottle services. Now, when the government says it wants to build a new incinerator, there are lots of opposing voices. But we hope to see a long-term roadmap. We have to adopt multi-pronged measures. I believe the government has to assure the public how it's going to enforce the law. Short response or answer by a document, please. Now, we talked a lot about proposed law enforcement arrangements. So, apart from enforcement at refuse collection vehicles and refuse collection points of the FEHD, now we can do more than Taiwan or Seoul. Now, many say that we have to enforce the law within buildings. Now, we can do that. Now, if you throw rubbish from an upper floor, of course, that is against the law. Now, you have to use a bag, the designated bag. Now, on the concrete measures, we can provide more information after the meeting. First, we'd like to thank all those participating. We are going to end the second segment. We will have a third. Please look out for the forthcoming documents. We will resume at 6:15.